Hey everybody, Rose Matter here. Welcome to part 20 of my Chaos Head Noah Let's Play. Man, oh man, the last episode, so much happened. It feels like we're just like rocketing towards the end, and that's where everything is like just ramping up. Rimi trying to rescue Nanami from the guy running the Noah project, and learning about her being tortured by this guy, and that's how she like unlocked her Gigalomania abilities, which I'm assuming is the case with everybody. They've all been tortured to the point where they unlock their abilities. Also, confirmation, yes, we already knew this, but that Takumi is Shogun. Shogun is Takumi, and then this Takumi is the delusion of him, obviously. Takumi not doing so well, basically suicidal, wanting to end it all, but being too afraid to do it himself. So he goes off to Shibuya to have someone kill him. And in that process, he unlocks his D-sword because he is determined to save Rimi. And that's the instigation to get him to finally become the hero. And also, we learned at the very end who the NewGen culprit is and what it's the nurse. There were hints about it, like her having that picture of the guy with the stakes and everything, but it was still a pretty shocking revelation nonetheless. So that's where we left off. Was we got the D-sword, we learned who the NewGen murderer is, and now we have to go from there. I'm super excited, like, now that we're getting answers to stuff, to see what else we're going to learn. So let's go ahead and see what happens next. Also, quick note, I am going to be out of town next week. I am going on vacation, so unfortunately there will be no episode of Chaos Head Noah next week. Just wanted to put that out there. Okay, now we're going to get into it. Let's go. Okay, so she's part of that too. So Suwa is obviously part of the Divine Light Church, whatever. And he talked to her. Like, did he have any idea that she was behind it? He's obviously working with them, but I don't know if it's like an unreliable narrator thing. But he seemed to genuinely not know that she was the killer, or like acted like they'd never interacted before. Midnight fell on A.H. Tokyo General Hospital, the place of Hazuki Shino's work. Within one of its operating rooms, the nurse stood nearly still. On the bed lay a young man, Konoe Chizuo. The sleeping pills he had been given had induced a deep coma in him. As she repeated the same words over and over like a Buddhist prayer, Hazuki caressed her large, swollen abdomen. Wait, what? Her large, swollen... Hold on. Wait, let's go back to that. Did she remove her own baby and put it into this guy? She was pregnant? Hazuki caressed her large, swollen abdomen. What? Oh, well, okay. God, this looks like something from a hentai. This looks like something from an eroge. Oh, God. Jeez. Am I playing a different game right now? Am I gonna have to censor some stuff? Then, with no anesthesia to speak of, she I can't speak right now, her own abdomen, an incision so masterfully done it would have earned her incredible praise from surgeons and obstetricians alike. Although she was a mere nurse, her surgical skills were quite remarkable, even while enduring the uninhibited pain of her self-surgery. The incision she made in her abdomen was performed with the utmost dexterity. Blood and amniotic fluid flowed from the wound. Her face contorted in pain, then, after a few grueling moments passed, Hazuki inserted her own hand inside her abdomen, and from within her she removed a blood-stained fetus. The fetus had yet to reach full maturity, and its forced removal had already ended its life prematurely. Hazuki performed an omphalomatomy, cutting the umbilical cord. Upon completion of this, she embraced her child lovingly, then placed it on the stand next to the operating table. With her hands now free, she began suturing her wound. The whole ordeal took nearly an hour to complete. With the sheer amount of pain the procedure procured, any normal person would have fainted long ago. Returning the fetus to her embrace, she stood up from the operating table and approached the man lying down on the bed. With bloodshot eyes, she looked down toward the unconscious man's face and thrust the scalpel into his abdomen. The movement was reckless and without care. providing a vast contrast to how delicately and accurately she'd torn apart her own abdomen before. The pain roused the man, but before he could consider any hope of escape, he realized both his arms and legs were tied securely to the bed. Disregarding the man's screams, Hazuki drew back the scalpel she had used to stab him. It cut through his flesh, tore through his skin. Blood gushed forth, covering her face in crimson. She neared her hands to the victim's wound, and then she forcefully began to widen it horizontally. The sound of flesh being torn open echoed throughout the operating room. Oh my god, the man's body started violently convulsing. The pain forced him to undergo a cycle of fainting, then waking up again. As she gazed at the gaping wound, Hazuki smiled a gentle smile. She then took her own child, which she had just taken from herself, and forcibly pushed it inside the man's gaping wound. God damn. It's been a while since, like, the game, like, it got violent at times, but rarely this detailed with the descriptions. Are we going through each murder she did? Okay, same one. Midnight, okay. Midnight fell on A.H. Tokyo General Hospital, the place of Hazuki Shino's work. Within one of its operating rooms, the nurse stood, nearly still. Okay, this is a different one. Okay, here we go. On the bed lay her psychiatrist colleague, Takashina Fumio. He was tied to the bed, but this was not the only thing that had been done to him. His cranium had been opened, and his brain was exposed. His skull had been cleanly cut, the line being right above the eyes.
Hazuki-kun, こんなことやめろ!
Takashina was conscious. Due to the effects of the anesthesia, he did not feel any pain from the cut. The utter dread he felt kept his eyes wide open, and his body was sweating greatly. Ignoring Takashina's pleas for his life, Hazuki retrieved a shiny silver utensil from the pocket of her white scrubs. A utensil that could not be referred to as a traditional surgical tool. It was a spoon, an all too ordinary piece of tableware. Hazuki reveled in ecstasy. As if enjoying a meal of curry and rice, she took a spoonful of Takashina's brain. Ugh, it's making me a little nauseous, not gonna lie. He then took the spoon and violently cast the contents onto a stainless steel tray. The pink brain tissue was pulped into a jelly-esque substance. Hazuki thrusted the spoon inside the brain once again. This time, however, she accumulated even more matter than she had the first time as she scraped away the brain tissue. Takashina's own brain was getting removed from his body, yet he felt no pain, nor did he lose consciousness. As well as this, the anesthesia had robbed him of any freedom of movement whatsoever. All the man could do was tremble in fear. Oh gosh, how many were there? Okay, I was like, are we going to go through every one? Because there was like 6 of them, right? 6 murders so far? Hazuki Shino looked up at the projection in shock. On the Scramble Crossings forum— oh shit, he displayed them so everyone knows. She did it. On the Scramble Crossings 4 massive jumbotrons, her very own memories were being shown. She couldn't even understand how it was being done. Perhaps it was Nishijo Takumi's power as a gigalomaniac. So is she behind all the murders or just some of them? Or like they're like different members of this divine church that caused the murders? There was like multiple people? With his head hung low and D-sword in hand, Nishijo Takumi murmured those words. The riot came to a halt. Silence was now the ruling entity. The thousands of people who had been assailing each other until only a moment ago were now looking up toward the screens. Some went pale, some averted their eyes. Some felt such horror it compelled them to vomit. The mass media were starting to record Hazuki with their cameras. Countless blinding flashes ensued.
NewGen 事件の真犯人だったんだ。
私の記憶を映像に投影したんですね。
もう言い逃れはできませんよ。胎児とあなたの DNA を鑑定すればわかることです。どうしてあんなことを。ねえ、クリム。
ナイトハルト。すべては教祖様のお言葉なんですよ。
Hazuki plunged her hand into the bag resting over her shoulder. From it, she retrieved both a Noah 2 terminal port and a scalpel. Oh god, is she gonna end herself now? Like, I've been caught. I'm gonna die. She gripped the scalpel and placed it right against her throat. Due to the nature of her position as a nurse, she knew the location of the corroded artery all too well. Hazuki smiled at Nishijo Takumi. It was a kind smile, much like the one she would so often show her patients. Damn, she didn't even get, like, karma. She didn't even get to, she seems a little Looney Tunes. I doubt that she would actually answer for her crimes. But, like, she just took herself out before she could be judged and, punished. As her own blood gushed forth from her neck, her entire body was painted a bright crimson. I didn't know who, but someone had mumbled those words. After seeing the sheer number of gazes piercing through me, I realized that those words were directed at me. In front of a countless number of people, Hazuki Shino had committed suicide via slitting her throat. Although calling it a martyrdom might have been more accurate, the choking smell of blood filled the air. The riot had now entirely stopped. Hazuki Shino's memories of the crime she'd committed, which I had projected directly onto the jumbotrons, ended up being the perfect thing to make the excited parts of the mob quiet down. The shocking nature of what had been displayed left everyone at a loss for words. Even now, Hazuki Shino's corpse was still bleeding. A number of people then walked up to it and began kicking it. It was the corpse of an atrocious murderer, so there were no respects to be paid here. Next, they might even publicly behead her like it was the Middle Ages. What difference was there between her and the ones kicking her corpse? By their very nature, humans were disgusting, horrible creatures, myself included. The media, like hyenas, were accumulating around anything that could act as a scoop. Roughly half of them had gathered around Hazuki Shino's corpse, and the other half were surrounding me.
Nishijo-kun, お見事でした。
今のは超能力ですか？やはりエスパーだったんですね。すごいです。
今日のこの集まりは初めから真犯人をおびき寄せるためのものだったの？
あなたの超能力は何歳頃に現れたものなんですか？
子供の頃のあだ名は神童とか呼ばれたことある？
今後警察の捜査に協力する予定は？
うちの局の番組に出てくれないかな。
One after the other, endless words of praise were thrown my way.
西条、よくやったぞ。
たくみくん、こっち向いて。
お前すげえよ。
好きです。付き合ってください。
One after the other, endless words of affection were thrown my way. I felt hollow hearing those voices. A fabricated image formed by public opinion and a delusionary being. They weren't all too different, were they? It was all coming back. The energy they'd all shown me when they'd seen me up on top of O-Front. Unable to take it anymore, I screamed. Tears started flowing. I felt completely miserable. I felt completely ridiculous. I forgot that the whole reason he came this way is he wanted to kill himself, or have someone kill him. I didn't have it in me to keep going without crying. I wasn't a hero. Oh no.
18歳未満だけどヘロゲして燃えって言ってる男だ。頭の中じゃ街を歩く女どもを裸にしむいてエロい妄想してる。それが僕だ。
Hey, that's not all the delusions. Come on now. Tears and mucus smeared down my face. I forgot I was being broadcasted live across the entire country. It didn't even occur to me I was shaming myself yet again. I couldn't help it. I was physically incapable of reading the room.
そうだよ。これでも僕は英雄かよ。違う。僕は英雄なんかじゃない。所詮 妄想の存在で希望だぜ。一人じゃ何もできないヘタレだ。
The voices around me went quiet. The onlookers sank into silence. The people from the media looked at me dubiously. Within the heart of Shibuya, in the middle of the humongous scramble crossing, only my voice was echoing.
それが僕だ。お前らに他人に僕っていう人間を決めさせない。僕の本質は僕が決める。僕はお前らのおもちゃじゃない。見せ物なんかにはならない。僕にはやるべきことがあるんだ。僕はお前たちなんかのために行動しない。
That's right, he's got his sword now. He's got to go save Rimi. Rimi's smile appeared in my mind. For the sake of those I cared about, I was here to fight, then disappear. But before I could voice that, I suddenly noticed that the night sky reflected in the corner of my eye was turning pure white. It wasn't a cloud, nor was it snow falling a little too early in the year. By the time I realized it was the same phenomenon from back when the earthquake had hit, it was already too late.
サードメルト予定より早い。
The first thing I felt was the very earth itself beginning to rumble. The ground began to shake. The white in the sky was spreading farther and farther. The very next moment I was struck with a violent ringing in my ears. It was such an intensely shrill, resonant sound, my head felt like it was about to burst open. Everyone around me was covering their ears, too. And then... the world was dyed completely white. Okay, that's chapter 9 done. We are on the last chapter now, Silent Sky. I was standing atop a body of water, incredibly clear, transparent water. It was shallow, reaching only my ankles, but it was not cold. Intermittently, the waves whispered in my ears. I was tightly grasping the handles of a wheelchair. Shogun, no, the real Nishijo Takumi, was right before me, his head adorned with his knitted cap. He sat ever so slightly hunched forward in his wheelchair. There wasn't a single thing surrounding us. Neither shells buried in the sand, nor seabirds elegantly soaring through the sky. Nothing so expressively emulative of the sea could be seen. There were no signs of life, only the blue sea and the crystal-clear sky. The terrain was completely flat all around me, with the horizon stretching as far as the eye could see. This place was not the real world. Together with the sound of breaking waves, I heard Shogun's voice. From where I was standing, I couldn't see his expression. The tone of his voice didn't carry any particular feeling of lamentation. In reality, his words felt like they were simply casual, passing remarks. Small, wrinkled, and withered away, all of his hair had fallen out. Was he aging prematurely? That illness was supposed to be rare, affecting only 1 out of every 8 million people. Yeah, that's when the whole thing with the bus, that seemed to be the moment that everything changed, when that whole moment with that bus and him predicting or wanting something to happen happened. A gruesome scene etched into my memories began to rise to the surface. Oh, before the accident. Okay.
僕の存在としての矛盾が大きくなりすぎちゃったんだ。青い瀬名から聞いてるだろ。
粒子とともに追生成される反粒子はディソードにストックされていくんだ。反粒子は数学的に言えば過去へ向かうものだから。ストックすればするほどギガロマニアックスには現在の状態とのズレが発生し、やがてその矛盾により存在としての自己崩壊へ至る。
As he spoke, Shogun didn't move an inch in his wheelchair. What was he looking at? Did he even see it all?
力を使えば使うほどこの病は進行しちゃうんだ。
ギガロマニアックスの力で治せばいいじゃないか。
力を使えば病は進行する。端的に言えば力を使ってもプラスマイナスゼロっていうことさ。何も変わらない。
どうして僕みたいな肝オタのヘタレ野郎を作ったの？もっと強くて行動的でかっこいいイケメンにすればよかったのに。
人を一人、しかもギガロマニアックスの力を使える人間を生み出すのは簡単なことじゃなかった。君を生み出したことで1年近く昏睡しちゃったくらいだよ。
僕は未完成だったってわけ。
だからこそ君はとても人間らしい。
フォローしなくてもいい。
That's the thing is, I guess, like, what, if he tried to make him like an alpha, like he said, someone who's more competent, would that have just taken up more of his energy? So did he need to create someone as close to like a regular person as possible and then have him, through his own will, choose to, you know, wield his powers and save the world? Because that's what it is to be human, is to give free will. If he just made someone and told them what to do, it wouldn't be human. So he had to kind of like nudge him along to do what he wanted. I clicked my tongue. I really did hate this guy.
彼女は君を助けたいでしょ
う。でも僕はリミの忠告に従うわけにはいかない。今の危機的状況は僕の IR2 がきっかけなんだから。
IR2, that strange scribble on the back of my essay.
IR2 はある科学者の目に留まり、やがてのぞみテクノロジー社によって研究が始められた。それがプロジェクトノア。言ってみれば人工的にギガロマニアックスの能力を発生させる装置。僕が計画に気づくことができたのはリミと出会ったからなんだ。彼女がひどい拷問を受けていたのはそのプロジェクトの一環だった。ノアのシステムを効率化するために必要だったのがコード3。ギガロマニアックスが力を使う過程で放出する特殊なノウハウの音。それを手に入れるためにのぞみの社長ノロセはリミに過酷な拷問を加えた。強烈な負の感情を抱くとき、ギガロマニアックスは力に覚醒し理想度を獲得するからね。
Once again, I remembered Senna's words.
バイオリズムの上昇によって中脳変影系ニューロンのドーパミンが過剰分泌されたとき、ディソードは現れる。それは危機的な状況や興奮、悲しみ、憎しみ、笑いなど人それぞれだ。ドーパミン分泌量が多ければそれだけ観測しやすくなる。
君が僕にちょっかいをかけてきたのもそのため。
うん。君を覚醒させるためにだ。ごめん。
Rimi and I weren't the only ones. There were others who had undergone severe mental or physical torture because of Project Noah. Ayase, Senna, Kozapi, and even Nanami. Cruel trials had been laid out for all of them, all so they could become gigalomaniacs. So wait, I know that Nanami is a gigalomaniac because that happened elsewhere. Like, that happened in that secret place where Project Noah is. But somehow I know that Nanami is a gigalomaniac.
IR2 から生み出されたノア2は僕が自分の手で止めなくちゃならない。でも僕はこんな体だ。満足に動くこともできない。それに僕のコードサンプルを欲しがる望みから狙われるようにもなっちゃって。
That was to say nothing of how he was hospitalized at AH Tokyo General Hospital, a place which had hidden ties to the Nozomi group.
だから身を隠さなくちゃいけなかった。
幻の病室のアミーちゃんか。
あそこに入ってこられたのはリミだけだったよ。僕は身動きが取れなくなって、それで
僕を作ったのか。
Shogun weakly nodded.
リミには君を消すように何度も言われたんだ。命を削る行為だからやめろって。でも僕に残された命は長くない。力を使わなくたってあまり差はないんだよね。
His voice was deeply serene. He had a certain sense of wiseness to him. Perhaps it was one you could only get from living out your days under a death sentence.
それに君が覚醒して力を使えるようになれば僕の命は持たないだろうか。
僕と君は一心同体っていうこと？
そうだね。
でも一つだけ約束。もう妄想はしないね。タクの妄想力はとっても強いから。妄想をすればするほど本物のあなたの命が削られていっちゃうんだ。
If I tried to keep my promise to Rimi, I couldn't go help her. Even if I could, I wouldn't be able to do a thing. It wouldn't matter what I tried. They'd turn the tables on me in an instant.
君の命はあとどれぐらい持つ？
きっと今日か明日まで。
Oh, okay. No pressure. No pressure to save the world. Only got a day or two. Cool.
そこまで。
I was stunned. I hadn't expected him to have so little time left.
僕が覚醒しちゃったから。
気にしなくていいよ。君の覚醒は僕にとって本望だから。
He's like, kinda wish you'd done that sooner though, bro.
君が死んだら僕はどうなる？
君は僕と一心同体であると同時にリアルブートされたことによって現実の人間になった。
Hey, so I'm not just a delusionary illusion anymore.
生まれ方は特殊かもしれないけど君は人間だよ。
僕が消えれば君は助かるよ。
無駄だよ。せいぜい寿命が数日から数週間伸びるぐらいじゃないかな。でもそんな愚かな選択肢を選ぶのはやめるんだ。君にはノア2を破壊してほしい。そのために力を使うことを遠慮しないでほしい。
言われなくても分かってる。君に遠慮するほど僕はお人よしじゃない。
Shogun's shoulders shook faintly as he laughed. Making him laugh was the last thing I had meant to do, so that annoyed me.
君が目覚めてくれてよかった。勝手な話で迷惑かもしれないけど、あと君に託す。
Suddenly, the feeling of the wheelchair's handles disappeared. Before I knew it, the wheelchair he was sitting in began to leave me behind. As it moved, it almost seemed to glide across the surface of the water. Its two wheels cut into the water, making waves as they turned. I had no intention of following him. Instead, I absently watched him go.
僕の役目は終わった。
勝手だね。僕に丸投げ。
少し疲れちゃって。眠らせてよ。
He turned to me from his wheelchair. As usual, I couldn't read his expression, but his voice showed an intense urgency.
時間がない。急いで。ノロセはノア2を本格的に稼働させた。こうなったらノア2を直接破壊するしかないんだ。頼んだよ。
And then, as if embraced by a cloud of mist, he began to disappear. The very colors of this mental world slowly began to fade.
君に頼まれる筋合いなんてない。僕自身が決めたことをやるだけ。
The sound of the waves became more distant. Just like Rimi had once, I burned this perfect, crystal clear sky into my memories. And then I gently closed my eyes. Oh, wow. Okay. Well. They did say this was going to be the biggest one yet, and I mean, we did see, like, the opening of game was just me and just in complete ruins. A reporter on the radio was reading the news with a grave tone. Damn. Over 30,000. Holy cow. Wait, they say the confirmed number of casualties, but could go over. I guess they gotta find all the bodies, but holy cow.
Shibuya では建物の一部が倒壊し、大規模な陥没も発生している模様です。首都高渋谷線が高架の倒壊により全線通行止め。公共交通機関では山手線など全線が運転を見合わせております。
Static mixed in with the news until eventually the reporter spoke no longer.
ダメだわ。また聞こえなくなった。
Momose shook and hit the old radio with her hand, but upon realizing she was getting nowhere, she let out a heavy sigh.
古いから使い物にならないわね。
Forcing a smile, she looked to the side. She could see the figures of Kishimoto Ayase and Kuzunoki Yua walking along, expressions of fatigue coloring their faces. Both of their uniforms were covered in soot, making it clear how laborious the trek here had been. And yet, the great swords they were holding, their D-swords, did not have a speck of dust on them. Instead, they shone with an unclouded, brutal radiance. After the earthquake, Yu and Ayase had walked back to Shibuya from Yoyogi, went straight to the Frisia office, and joined up with Momose. Waiting for the missing Bond to return. Oh yeah, shit, Bond! Right, he's probably dead, right? We didn't get any confirmation. It'd be great if he strolled in and he was actually fine somehow, but I don't know. Waiting for the missing Bond to return, the three had stayed near the office throughout the night. Even though the earthquake had put the building on the verge of collapse, they had remained all the same. But, in the end, Bond had never shown. Momose suggested leaving Shibuya immediately, something Ayase clearly took issue with.
グラジオールが目覚めたのよ。早く他の黒騎士と合流しないと。
Ayase asserted her feelings of urgency by tugging on Yua's hand, wanting to reach the rubble-laden heart of Shibuya as quickly as they could. In the end, Yua and Momose had no choice but to follow along. It was 7 a.m. Not even an hour had passed since the sky had first begun to brighten. There was not a single trace of the refreshing morning air. The utter mayhem that had been cloaked in darkness was slowly being exposed by the rising sun, and right now the three girls found themselves in the midst of it. The city of Shibuya had been transformed into the very picture of hell itself. Roads were torn to oblivion, asphalt protruded from the earth. A number of buildings had collapsed, their debris scattered in broken chunks along the sides of the road. Nearly every window that could be seen was broken, and a massive billboard had fallen from its usual perch atop a building's roof. One would not have to walk far to see countless corpses left undisturbed, littered among the chaos. For every body Momose witnessed, the same act played out inside her head, one in which she clasped her hands together in pity for their demise. But there was just far too many. It was only partway through that she could not take it anymore, realizing the only way to retain her sanity was to ignore them outright. The remaining people they would occasionally pass by had lost all expression, existing only to stagger aimlessly through the streets. A group of men had come together to try and help the survivors buried beneath the rubble, but it didn't seem like there was much they could do without heavy lifting equipment. Momose took another glance at what Yua was holding in her hands. A D-sword. Ayase had explained them to her. Much like magic, they were swords that could be taken out of thin air. What Bon had told her had been true. And yet, Yua seemed only shocked and bewildered about possessing one for herself. Ayase, walking slightly ahead of the group, paid no attention to Momose's call. The expression on her face made it clear her patience was wearing thin.
I want
Momose to have a D-sword, come on. We need a middle-aged magical woman. Come on, we need to be like, it's not just all cute high school girls and one high school boy. I want Bon, I want a magical man too. Let's give everybody D-swords. Ayase was effectively a brick wall. With no other options left, Momose repeated the same words for what felt like the 1000th time. Ayase suddenly came to a halt, as though Yua's backing had possibly made some sense to her. She narrowed her eyes. And then she looked beyond the rugged Doganzaka road that no car could traverse. Oh shit, Nanami! At the end of Ayase's gaze was a lone girl walking away from the station. She was wearing a Sume Academy uniform, though it was far more tattered than either Ayase's or Yua's. She looks so sad, like she's usually such a chipper girl, and she just looks so glazed over and dead. And with only her left hand, she was holding an enormous cross-shaped sword to her chest. Her gait was markedly unsteady. It looked as though she could collapse at any moment. Momose's body jiggled as she ran toward the girl, towards Nishijo Nanami. I like Momose. She's a bro. She's a sis. Like she's like such a mom. The D-sword Nanami was carrying had caught her eye, but instead of prying in order to satiate her curiosity, she focused only on supporting the girl's petite frame. Nanami's eyes responded in blank confusion to Momose's words of encouragement. Both Yua and Ayase belatedly ran up behind Momose. Nanami's groaned in pain. Momose inadvertently glanced toward Nanami's right hand, gasping in surprise when she did. Yua and Ayase were not able to grasp why Momose was so distraught. While the bandage over Nanami's right hand was indeed stained with blood, it did not seem to be that serious of an injury. However, in Momose's eyes, Nanami's hand had been severed from her bandaged wrist. Though medical measures had been taken, it was still an open— Wait, so, like, they don't see that she's missing her hand? Only Momose could see that? With a blank look on her face, Ayase attempted to grab Nanami's right hand, but her outstretched hand passed only through empty air. Like a holographic image, Nanami's fingers lacked any substance. A drop of blood trickled down from the red-stained bandage and fell onto Ayase's hand. Okay, so it's a delusion that she's got her hand, I guess? Yeah.
崎畑凛美さん。
知ってるの？
ええ、西条くんのお友達の。
Yua had always held the suspicion that Takumi was the true NewGen culprit, so she knew a fair amount about his background. This also extended to those that would frequently come into contact with him. Therefore, it was only natural for her to have conducted investigations on Nishijo Nanami and Sakihata Rimi. In contrast to Yua, Ayase abandoned her typical aloof expression, grimacing at the mere mention of Rimi's name. Oh, that's right, because she slapped her.
崎畑凛美も7人の黒騎士の一人。そうなんですか？
Ayase recalled yesterday's incident at the hospital. She could remember being addressed by Rimi's apologetic voice. Yeah, what really happened with them? Obviously, that whole thing that she said about, like, I accused her of something. Like, did that actually happen? I don't think so. That was a delusion.
タクに近づかないで。目覚めさせたくないの。君には自覚がないの。黒騎士の一人としての。私が一人で何とかするから。
とても美しいわ、その思いは。でもそれは大いなる意志の望むことじゃない。私も望んでいないわ。あなた一人に全てを背負わせるなんて。
黒騎士云々の話は今は置いときましょう。とにかく早く病院に連れて行かないと血が止まらないわ。
Momose gently placed her handkerchief on Nanami's open wound.
すごい熱だし、顔色も悪い。急がないと。
お兄に会いたいよ。
Tears trickled from Nanami's vacant eyes. Right at that moment, something happened. In an instant, the highway they were standing on collapsed with a deafening roar. They all lost their footing, helplessly entering freefall at gravity's mercy. To them, it was like they were falling into the deepest, darkest, lowest circle of hell. Losing herself in the illusion, Momose raised a scream so loud it betrayed her age entirely. I thought that was like a cat going meow for a second. When I came to, dark clouds covered the sky overhead. The dark night had come to an end before I knew it. There wasn't a shred of blue sky in sight. I was hit with a wave of depression. The sky could not have been more gloomy. Countless sirens from ambulances and fire trucks blared off in the distance. A multitude of helicopters were in the sky, circling the city like flies. My head was racked with pain, like someone was putting a jackhammer to it. It felt even worse than after the last earthquake. I tried to remember what had happened before my memories had cut off. Sky turning white, Shogun mentioning the third melt. I ignored my headache and stood up, only to lose all words. Okay, so yeah, this is like what we encountered at the beginning of the game, right? And then Rimi came with her D-sword and I can't quite remember. Did she kiss us? She did something with us, like help revive us or something. This feels very similar to like Steins Gate and Steins Gate 0, where like the first ending is like, oh, you didn't do it right, so everything has gone to crap, so you need to do it again to like try and fix everything. The usual scenery was entirely absent. It was like a scene out of the end of the Millennium thing that everyone had been freaking out about almost a decade ago. Shibuya was on the verge of collapse. Traffic lights, roadside trees, and buildings had all fallen to the ground. The jumbotrons, the most iconic part of Scramble Crossing really, had cracks ripping through them and were entirely silent. The stairs leading down to the subway were buried beneath the rubble of their own ceilings. The guard around the Yamanote line had fallen apart, and the railway had been ripped to shreds. More people than I could count were lying on the ground. Blood and guts clung to the scattered debris. Some remained motionless, some moaned in pain, some screamed for help. Some were covered in dust, crawling on all fours without a care as to how it made them appear. Some only cried, tightly cradling another motionless body in their arms. I could smell all the blood, the rusty smell mixed with the stench of something burning. Everything was covered with the thick odor of dust. Far in the distance, plumes of black smoke rose like smoke signals. This was the power of Noah too. It was horrifying. This was already on the scale of a weapon of mass destruction. I now understood why Shogun wanted to put an end to this. Come to think of it, where was Shogun? Where's Rimi? She was not doing so well last time. When I came back to myself, I surveyed my surroundings. There was a bent wheelchair lying pretty close to me, and right beside it, his delicate frame was lying there. I ran over to him in a panic and lifted him up.
Oi! しっかりして!
He didn't react. Not even his inner voice said anything. Oh God, was he dead? I put my ear to his mouth. As faint as it was, he was still breathing, but he was still unconscious. I tried hitting him lightly on the cheek a few times, but to no avail.
ノア2はどこにあるの?
If I didn't know where it was, there was no way I could make it in time to save Rimi or Nanami. I should have asked him that when I had the chance. Clicking my tongue, I took my phone out of my pocket. It was off, and despite my many attempts to get it working, it stayed that way. It was nothing more than garbage now. Aside from Shogun, who else would know where to find it? Think, goddammit. I didn't have time for this. While I was wandering around doing absolutely goddamn nothing, that Norose guy could be ready to kill Rimi at any moment. Then who? Who was someone I could trust? Someone who knew about Noah too. Alright, we gotta find him. We gotta find Senna's dad.
中でも一番特別なのは、その目、誰の目を産み落とした少年。
畑野一世。
Senna's dad, one of the founding members of Project Noah, a person who is nowhere to be found right now. Not to mention I'd never met him before. Wait, it was possible we'd passed each other on the street before, actually. Kozabi had told me all about his homeless lifestyle, with the guy always wandering around Shibuya.
見つけるしかない。
With the surprisingly light body of Shogun on my back, I mindfully made my way through the debris. I didn't have a clue as to where Hatano-san was, but I had no choice. I had to find him no matter what. As light as Shogun's body was, it was still nearly 20 kilograms. It was hard enough just carrying him around Shibuya, but it was even worse factoring in all the uneven roads. I wasn't one for exercise. I mean, hell, my daily routine consisted of me just sitting in front of my computer all day. I considered finding a way to get Shogun to the hospital, but with Shibuya the way it was, I doubted I could even get an ambulance. Even the gentle hill that was Dokanzaka was doing its best to drain all my energy. I could barely breathe, and my whole body was gushing out buckets of sweat. Wiping the sweat off my forehead, I took a quick break to catch my breath. Suddenly, I could faintly hear someone's voice. Someone was singing, their voice rife with loneliness, but not without hope. Their soothing voice washed over me. I had heard this singing somewhere before. Back at the concert, even in spite of the glaring lights overwhelming my vision and the blaring sound shaking the entire airtight building, I still managed to take it in. This time, I was in the middle of the road where I couldn't see a single sign of life. And yet, in the center of this collapsed city dominated by death, I could hear her. Put Shogun down and surveyed my surroundings once again, but the only people I could see were the collapsed corpses strewn across the city. I did my best to avoid looking at them, instead focusing on trying to find Ayase. Where the hell was her voice coming from? The road in front of me was wholly caved in. Looking at it, the hole it had created was incredibly big. There was definitely a subway tunnel beneath it. I didn't want to believe it at first, but even so I peered down from the edge of the hole. Oh, and he's gonna see his sister too, right? It was about 5 meters deep. There was a pretty fair amount of rubble piled up at the bottom, and that was where Ayase had fallen.
今助けるよ。
I jumped down into the hole. I didn't stick the landing whatsoever, instead basically slamming into the rubble while just barely avoiding falling over. Ayase's leg was pinned under a pretty sizable slab of concrete, stopping her from moving. I really did give it my best effort, but moving it just wasn't possible on my own.
私だけじゃない。他に3人いるわ。君の妹も。
ナナミが。
What the hell was she doing here? Hadn't that Norose guy kidnapped her?
ナナミ！ナナミ！
Enduring the pain in my legs, I stood up and yelled out for my sister, but I got no reply. Looking around me, I only saw one other person beside Ayase. There was a pretty hefty woman lying face down on the ground, and while she wasn't moving, she only seemed to be unconscious. Nanami and one other person were absent. Maybe they'd been buried alive. I had to find them right this second. My eyes shot to the top of the hole. There was enough dust to make anyone hack their lungs out. But beyond that, I could see a circular shape of the sky above. I thought about Shogun who had laid on the road up there. I remembered what Rimi had told me.
妄想すればするほど本物のあなたの命が削られていっちゃうんだ。
Can I get my sword out? Can I like real boot my sword and maybe hack that slab off of Ayase? Would that count as a delusion? Would that like cut into his lifespan, I guess? But I couldn't hesitate here. There we go. Okay. I drew my D-sword entirely from thin air. Oh yeah, they don't know. Ayase doesn't know, right? That's... Is she not more surprised? Do they somehow know when someone has, like, activated their D-sword? Like, the fact that I knew that Nanami was a megalomaniac? But Ayase seems like just kind of nonplussed. She doesn't seem too surprised about the fact that I got my D-sword. Consciously avoiding looking at her leg, I sat down near Ayase and peered at her face. I stared into her eyes, refusing to look at anything else. That should do the trick. Strong one. A really strong one.
綾瀬の足の上にある瓦礫は大きなものじゃない。数は多いけど、一つ一つは小さい。重くない。簡単に足を引っ張り出せる。他の二人も助け出せる。
Me and Ayase, we only needed mutual recognition between us two gigalomaniacs, because once we had that, then our delusion was sure to become reality. Out of nowhere, Ayase smiled in relief. She gently stroked my cheek with her fingers.
グラジオールの導きに君がここに来てくれたのは。
I blinked nervously. Exactly as I deluded it to be. A large slab of concrete pinning Ayase's leg had now turned into a heap of smaller pieces. Pushing away some of the debris, Ayase slipped her leg right out. I really hadn't expected that to go so damn well. Starting to move, she massaged her ankle. Luckily, her injuries didn't seem all that bad.
綾瀬の歌が聞こえたんだ。それに導かれたんだよ。
そう。よかった。歌い続けてきて。
Helping Ayase up, I stood and took a look around.
ナナミは
I still didn't see any signs of my sister. Had my delusion failed after all? Or was Nanami already... I began to feel anxious. I heard a voice. Looking in the direction of it, I saw a hand reaching out from a gap inside the rubble. And so I took that hand, gripped its slender fingers, and peered into the gap. He's like, oh, I'm gonna leave you there, bitch.
Oh.
The gap was almost like a tunnel, and in that tunnel was a familiar-looking girl wearing glasses. It felt like it had been ages since I'd last seen Yua.
なぜか急にこの隙間ができて、ついさっきまで全く身動きが取れなかったんですけど。
The girl averted her eyes from me with a face that seemed almost apologetic.
Dale.
No, it's nice to know that he's not hesitating to help her. I tightly gripped Yua's hand, and then I pulled as hard as I possibly could away from the gap. Ayase helped as well. With the two of us pulling Yua with all our might, she managed to break free from the rubble without too much trouble. She was covered from head to toe in dust. A few pieces of concrete were tangled up in her long hair. But even with all that, Yua seemed completely uninjured. And now, Nanami. Leaving Yua with Ayase, I started to search for Nanami. Given Yua had managed to break free, I could only assume my delusion had actually worked. And if that were true, then Nanami should have been in some rubble somewhere I could yank her free from. And lo and behold, that was exactly the case. As I searched through tons and tons more rubble, I managed to catch a glimpse of Nanami's face through a crack in the debris.
Nanami!
I called to her, but she didn't respond. She must have fainted. Reaching out, I went to touch her shoulder, but hesitated. Oh, is he afraid that if he touches her, she's going to disappear like before? Like she's not real? A memory from yesterday flashed into my mind, of Nanami vanishing into particles right before my eyes. No, this has to be the real Nanami. Gathering my resolve, I grabbed her by the shoulder, or more specifically, by her blouse. I could actually touch her. I could feel her warmth. Just like I had with Yua a bit ago, I pulled her out with all my strength. Unlike Ayase or Yua, however, Nanami's uniform was stained with blood. Her hand especially was covered in red. Regardless, I laid her down on the ground, then went to check her breathing. She seemed to be in pain, but she was still breathing.
Yokatta.
Even so, I couldn't help but worry about her right hand. It was absolutely covered in blood. And yet, when I tried to grab it, my finger slipped right through it. A delusional hand? That could only mean Nanami's right hand was...
Gomen. Makikonde.
A groan leaked from Nanami's mouth. Her face was caked in dust. I gently stroked her cheek and watched as her eyelids slowly began to open. Her gaze faintly wandered for a moment before finally landing on me.
Nanami.
And at the very moment, Nanami's expression warped and changed. Tremendous tears broke free from her eyes. Her left hand firmly grasped my own. She whispered to me so happily it felt as if she never wanted to let me go. But when I heard those words, I responded with a slight shake of my head.
Nanami no honto no oni wa
Why would you tell her that right now? Let her have that
boku
moment.
janai yo.
This poor girl, man, she just can't get a moment of peace. My memories are so cloudy. That was how Nishijo Nanami felt. Her brother's words had been the trigger in her heart, and now she felt as if she had two brothers. However, what her heart told her was that it was not just as if she had two, but that she really did have two. Her mind flashed back to the past, and she remembered her two brothers' faces. One of them seemed quite pathetic. One of them was covered in wrinkles, and yet, despite these distinctions, she was still convinced that she only had a single brother. Something was not adding up. Something between her memories and her cognition. What was reality? What was illusion? She did not know, and that scared her. To escape this, she attempted to empty her mind of all thoughts, when suddenly her own voice audibly rippled outward. "Nana, you need to stay strong." Oh, okay. The next thing she knew, she was standing in a hallway illuminated by the setting sun. She could smell disinfectant, and before her stood a rather plain door. She reached out toward it and took hold of the handle, and then, through no will of her own, her hand opened the door.
ああ、お兄、またご飯食べないつもり？ちゃんと食べてっていつも言ってるじゃん。出ないと元気になんないよ。あ、もしかしてグリーンピースが入ってるから？子供じゃないんだし、いい加減好き嫌いやめたら？そりゃ、ナナだってグリーンピース嫌いだから残したくなる気持ちはわかるけど。ちゃんと食べてくんないとナナが怒られるんだからね。あの怖い看護師長さんに。
ナナミ。
何？
今まで辛く当たってごめん。
お兄が謝るなんて珍しいじゃん。
もう僕のために無理をする必要はないんだ。
何言ってるの？
僕は身を隠さなくちゃならなくなった。だからお前はもうここには来なくていい。
I wonder how long ago this happened.
何のつもり？
さようなら。
And that was where her memories cut off. Those memories about her real brother. Her brother had been suffering from a serious illness, leading her to graciously spend many years tending to him in the hospital. No matter how much time had passed, she knew she had to stay strong so she could best take care of him in his time of need. For the past year and a half, these things had disappeared from her memory entirely. Right, year and a half. That's when 18 months, I think. That's like how old the new Takumi was. She had forgotten that those memories had even existed. And in exchange for that, her brother had continued living on his own in good health, right there in Shibuya. Her mother had asked her to routinely check in on him, leading her to sometimes drop by on the way home from school. And thus she had done so, thinking nothing of it. After all, he was her brother. Checking in on him might as well have already been routine. She had never housed any doubts about it.
どうしてナナは忘れちゃってたんだろう。
Nearly 30 minutes had passed since she had been rescued from beneath the rubble, and now she'd finally been reunited with her real brother. Here he was, lying still on the road. He was breathing, but remained unconscious. His body was as small, wrinkled, emaciated, and incredibly weak as she remembered. It was the brother from so long ago whom she had always known.
こんなのひどいよ。ナナはお兄に文句ばっかり言ってたけど。
Though her brother did not reply, she clung to his small body all the same, letting loose a flood of tears.
お兄のこと一度だって忘れたいなんて思ったことなかったのに。勝手だよ。わがまますぎだよ。
The sound of metal lightly scraping against something came from within her brother's clothes, and a moment later something slipped free from his pocket. Oh, the bangle! It was what Nanami had been searching for. When she lost her right hand, she lost it as well. A flimsy, cheap bangle with a snowflake motif. Confused, she stared at her real brother's face, but his eyes, buried in wrinkles, did not open in return. Nanami picked up the bangle with her left hand. She remembered how it felt to touch. It was her brother's first present to her, Nanami's greatest treasure. Nanami lifted her gaze, unconsciously searching for her other brother. He was holding a long sword, and his back was turned to her. But he was walking away. He was leaving this place. Even without saying a word, Nanami could understand that much. The fact he might leave without saying a word to her left her wrought with a terrible loneliness.
行っておいで。
Nanami's brow furrowed in confusion, and she softly searched around herself.
今声が。
It was her brother's voice. That much she indeed remembered. The voice of her brother who should have been unconscious.
彼は僕と一心同体。もう一人のお兄なんだから。
Whether it was truly her brother's voice or a mere hallucination, Nanami could not tell. And yet, regardless of which it was, she whispered all the same.
わかった。
She whispered to her brother who still lay on the ground. Nanami stood up and walked toward her older brother's back. She hardly had any strength left. Day after day she had been trapped in a pitch-black room, forced to take part in some sick tableau of agonizing crucifixion. She could not even remember how many times she had thought she would die. Her right hand in particular caused her tremendous amounts of pain, as if a chisel was being struck into it all the way to the bone. The sensation that she lacked her hand, together with the illusion that it still remained, were tearing her mind in two. That's something that actually happens to people sometimes when they lose their limbs, right? I think it's called like phantom limb, where it's like they feel it's still there. That's got to be such a strange feeling. She was exhausted, both mentally and physically. If she lost focus, there was no doubt she would fall to the ground, too drained to get back up again. Therefore, she had to make a desperate effort to reach her hand out at this very instant. Even if it took more effort than she could give, she would do everything in her power to make him stop. She's so cute. She narrowly managed to squeeze something out, and thankfully he had heard. He halted his stride and looked back toward Nanami. Even though she had managed to stop him, she was lost on what exactly to say to him. The reality that this person was not her brother at all. The conviction that this person was her brother to the end. Those two feelings had blended together in her head, making them even harder to discern. But she gripped her bangle tightly in her left hand. It had been his gift to her, one that felt cold to the touch, but warm to the heart. The very existence of this bangle linked both him and her together. That was how she felt. And that answer was all she needed. Her hesitation instantly faded.
お兄は本当のお兄じゃないかもしれないけど、頼りにならなくておたくさんで、アニメキャラもお人形さんばっかり集めてて、口が悪くて愛想もなくて意地悪なことばっかり言うけど、お兄もナナのお兄だよ。
Trying her hardest to fight back her tears, Nanami smiled as best as she could. Let's get a hug. Come on, hug your sister, you. Come on. That's it?
Nanami.
Give her a hug, man. Upon gazing at his expression, she saw that her older brother still seemed a little embarrassed, and with that, relief washed over Nanami before slowly putting her consciousness to rest. Aw, boo. Nanami nearly collapsed, and I hurriedly went to catch her. She lost consciousness. Her face was pale, and she was clearly having trouble breathing.
早く病院に運ばないと、このままじゃ危ないわ。
The hefty woman who had introduced herself as Momose peered at Nanami's face as she voiced her concern. Next, she turned to Shogun.
そっちに寝かせてる子もね。
I decided to leave Nanami in Momose-san's care.
2人を頼みます。
あなたはどうするの？
探さなくちゃいけない人がいて。
So I could learn the whereabouts of Noah too. I had asked Nanami since she had been taken there when she was kidnapped, but she wasn't too sure of it herself. In the end, I had no choice but to find Hatano.
必要なことなの。グラジオールを倒すために。
グラジオールか。
Replace that with Noah too, and...
そうだよ。
Come on, hopefully these two can come with you. Come on, you're gonna need all the help you can get. Ayase's expression stiffened. She took a single step toward me. By the way she slightly dragged her leg, I could tell she had genuinely been injured.
一緒に行くわ。私も。
その必要はないよ。
Even though I tried to tell her no, she only shook her head in refusal.
一に集まらないと。
Seven must gather. Okay, so I'm sure that Yua will come too. Maybe she'll be like, I'm sorry for thinking that you were the killer. I'll help you. Because I feel bad. And also, she'll want to know, like, what happened with her sister as well. Maybe she can get answers.
綾瀬も、それに、ユアも、畑野っていう人を探してほしい。
At the mere mention of her name, Yua jumped a little from her hiding spot behind Momose.
その人が、ノア2の場所知ってるから。一緒に行動しなくても、僕はみんなの見聞きしたことがわかる。だから、今は手分けして探して。
That was the best option we had at the moment, and we had to be quick about it. There was no guarantee we'd be safe if another earthquake struck.
わかった。
Ayase seemed to agree with me, though she didn't look all that happy about it.
なんだかよくわからないけど、
野呂瀬源一が全ての黒幕です。
そういうこと。それなら妹さんたちのことは私に任せなさいな。
Momose-san puffed out her chest in a display of bravado, and then she gave me a quick nod, likely in an attempt to cheer me on.
ただし、無茶しちゃダメよ。それと一つ頼まれてほしいんだけど。
Oh, maybe like, can you find Bon?
バンちゃん、
Yeah.
ヘラヘラ笑ってるうさんくさそうな中年刑事を見たら、私に連絡するように伝えてくれる？
Did she mean Bon Yasuji? I knew all about how he had died. Okay, confirmation. How he had been shot and killed by his own partner. I had unconsciously seen it all unfold. I fully intended to tell Momose-san this, but...
まったく。あの人はこんな時にどこをほっつき歩いてるんだか。
Hopefully in one of the playthroughs we can save everybody, prevent the earthquake from happening, keep Bon from dying. That'd be nice. Keep Nanami from losing her hand.
まあ、案外どこかで怪我人を助けてるのかもしれないけどね。
Momose had to go and say something like that, and now I could no longer bring myself to tell her the truth.
というわけでよろしく。
はい。
Without meaning to, I'd nodded, making a promise I'd never be able to keep. But that had to be the only answer I could ever. But that had been the only answer I could have ever thought to make.
Nishijo-kun.
With her head lowered, Yua spoke with a barely audible voice. For a good while now, she had been nervously taking peeks at me, which made me think she had something to say.
あなたのこと疑ってごめんなさい。私、西条くんを傷つけるようなこと言って。
The lenses of her glasses were covered in dust, and yet I knew very well that behind them her eyes were wet with tears.
謝っても許してもらえるとは思ってないです。それでも謝らせてください。ごめんなさい。
She bowed her head deeply. I didn't reply. All I did was turn my back to her.
僕のベースにあるセーラのフィギュア。
And she'd be like, you can have them.
よかったらもらってくれる？
Look at him, that's character development. Back when she deceived me, I couldn't have been more shocked, but now I understood why she had done what she had done. So it just felt wrong to say, I forgive you, or something along those lines. It was true I had always thought of her as my enemy, but I had no right to make her bow to me, nor any right to forgive her.
いいんですか？
もらってほしい。
はい。また一緒にフィギュア買いに行きましょうね。
And with that, Yua put on the same gentle smile she had had when we first met. I nodded to her in response. I exchanged looks with both Ayase and Momose-san. Then I etched the image of Nanami and Shogun into my eyes one last time. And so I began walking alone among the mountains of rubble once again. Shinsen station of the Inokashira line was one stop from Shibuya, with it taking only about a minute to arrive there by train. The station itself was situated within an underground tunnel, resulting in the only natural light being the beam seeping in from the opening at the end of the platform. Due to the earthquake, all of the lights had gone out, enveloping the area in a far thicker darkness than usual. Carefully supporting Orihara Kozue's body, Aoi-sana set foot onto the platform. There had been no need to buy a ticket. Not a single staff member was present in the vicinity, and none of the ticket machines were in service. Only a glance was necessary to understand how horribly warped the railway tracks had become. It was no wonder that the trains had suspended operation the day before. Kozue's left leg was drenched in blood. She had been deeply cut by broken glass during the earthquake. Senna had attempted to staunch the flow of blood with a towel, but the wound was far worse than she had supposed. Basic first aid would not suffice. Gigalomaniacs are unable to use their powers to heal wounds. To the brain, pain is an inescapable reminder of reality. Thus, Gigalomaniacs cannot form any sort of mutual recognition to the effect of, I'm not wounded, or the injury didn't happen. Human instinct would never allow it. Even with Kozoe's teary protests, Senna remained wordless. She marched intently toward Shinsen Station. Only one thing held her focus, something she refused to divert any attention from. When they at last reached the deserted platform, Senna quickly pulled back the arm she had been using to support Kozoe. With no strength remaining in one of her legs, Kozoe immediately collapsed to the ground. Kozoe lifted her gaze in bewilderment, but Senna paid her no mind. Glaring motionlessly at a certain point in the distance, the black-haired girl gritted her teeth. Oh gosh, that's right, she's after her dad. This is the problem, because she wants to kill her dad, and we need to get to her dad to find out where Noah 2 is. At the end of her gaze, in the dark recesses of the platform, sat a lone human figure. It was a homeless man clad in filthy rags. In his hands he held a sign that read, "The hearts of the people face annihilation." Senna slowly approached the man. Her voice was cold and unfeeling, a tone that could freeze all who came in contact with it. Does he not recognize his daughter? I mean, it hasn't been that long. Yeah, I figured. He would know who she is. Keeping his head hung low, the homeless man did not even look his daughter in the eye as he dispassionately spoke her name.
お前に慣れ慣れしく名前を呼ばれたくない。この半年、ずっと考えてきた。お前をどうやって殺すか。
ありがと
う。どうして礼を言う？
利己的な理由だよ。お前に殺されることが私にとって最善の贖罪かもしれない。そう思ったからだ。
Now she's like, well, no, I don't want to. I don't want to give you the satisfaction.
それなら話は早い。
Oh, okay, never mind. Well, this is no good. We're not going to be able to find out where Noah 2 is, and probably everything's going to go to crap, and we won't be able to succeed. Senna real-booted her D-sword. The method she had chosen for her father's execution was death by her D-sword. The simplicity behind it laid the truth bare. The way she killed him did not matter. All that mattered was killing him at all.
すまない。
Hatano still refused to raise his head.
どうして謝る？
お前に父殺しの汚名を着せてしまうからだ。
殺せさえすれば、どんな恥ずかしめだって受けてやる。お前は母さんと妹を殺した。
事実だ。
しかもあんなむごい最後。
Senna could only act calm and collected for so long. As her emotions began to take control, she was seized by a fierce tremble.
お前には見せたくはなかった。いや、今のは聞き流してくれ。
なぜあんなことを？
過程を説明することは無意味だよ。お前は納得しないし、結果が改変されるわけでもない。
Senna thrusted the tip of her D-sword towards Hatano's head.
そうやってまた逃げるのか？
間違っていたのは私だ。それがすべてなんだ。
お前には失望した。
まだ期待していたのか。何を？人を含めて世界はすべて電気仕掛け。そう言ったのはお前だ、セナ。
Senna's shoulders trembled. For nearly 3 years, ever since Hatano had begun the Mana project, the two of them had rarely come into contact. And yet, despite the significant time apart, Hatano had seen right through her, something which troubled her to no end. Distraught by the sheer discomfort she felt, the wavering of her heart morphed into nothing but pure fury, dispelling any form of reason she still had within.
セナ、惑わされるな。電気仕掛けならば、お前のその私を恨む感情もまた、ただの電気信号でしかない。
Hatano is just trying to overwhelm me. That was what Senna told herself. Calm down.
お前の言葉なんか無効だ。
あまり感情的な行動をとるな。でなければ、お前は矛盾する。その言葉を受け取ってはいけない。精神攻撃だ。判断を中止するんだ。
話を。終わりだ。
Senna tried to take a stance with her D-sword. But before she could, Hatano suddenly stood up. Kozue watched their exchange with unease, and when she wondered if she should interfere, the pain in her leg forced her to abandon all hope of doing so. She was not sad, but that did not stop her from weeping deep within herself. Hatano took one large step forward. Her response delayed, Senna switched to an offensive position, but in her attempt to brace herself, her feet slipped on the gravel. As her body shook and staggered, her stance began to collapse. Any sort of edge her appearance had once held disappeared, and in its place came a great fear. Her hatred toward her father was what had given her the strength to persist. But now that the time had come to face him at last, she found herself deeply afraid. She did not quite understand why that was. All she knew was that the cause lay within the words he had just spoken. Hatano threw himself at her with tremendous speed. Was he hugging her like in the delusion? That all the way back when she was fighting Rimi, as she fell backward, ignoring both gravity and centrifugal force alike. She swung her enormous D-sword up from below. Well, so much for that. The blade first carved out the tile of the platform floor and then slashed straight through her father's shoulder. It moved with a fluidity akin to a hot knife through butter. Her father's hand sent her flying backward. Was he trying to protect her from something? Fresh blood burst from her father's injury. His eyes were colored with an expression of deep relief. Senna's teeth sank into her lip. Oh, not even a second later, something pierced her father's chest at lightning speed. Ah, shit, so yeah, he was trying to protect her. Tearing in through his back, it flew straight through the man's chest, very narrowly grazed Senna, then swiftly disappeared. Now blood gushed not just from his shoulder, but from his chest as well. The crimson liquid flowing from his wound splattered against Senna's cheeks. A bullet. Having been thrown backward, the moment Senna landed on her rear, her head shot right back up, and she frantically searched for the shooter. Ah, shit. Suwa, that's right. He's been kind of just in the background doing God knows what. So he's trying to take out all of the gigalomaniacs. A man stood in the crossway between the Shinsen station tunnel and the tunnel leading to Shibuya station, the sole place illuminated by a gaping patch of sky above. He was holding a handgun. Senna's father collapsed beside her. Half of his body was already soaked in blood. No, were you protecting me? Overcome with disbelief, Senna fixed her gaze on the pool of blood spilling over the tile floor. Gasping for air, her father weakly spoke. The bullet had been meant for Senna, but Hatano had taken it in her place. She had been trying to take her father's life, but he had given it for her instead. Senna tightened her grip on the D-sword she held in her hand. An odd noise echoed throughout the platform, a sound Senna instantly recognized as a Noah 2 terminal. How long had that sound been going on for? Senna would not let it continue. The existence of the man who had stepped between her and her father, the man whose gun had prematurely ended their resolution, was something she would not let continue. When she stood up and fixed her eyes ahead. A baby! The cries of an infant began to resound through the dimly lit platform. A sense of strange discomfort grew in her hands. For some reason, she could not Oh, don't tell me it's her little baby sister. He's like screwing her up. He's creating delusions to distract her. Instead of a sword, she was clutching a decayed, desiccated baby. In an action motivated by reflex, she cast it away from her. But immediately after she had done so, she realized that child was her own sister. Her sister whom she'd only seen once before, long ago. Her sister whose name she did not know, and whose own mother had devoured her until hardly anything remained. That was the child before her. Large avulsions where chunks of meat had been bitten free covered her entire frame. Each tear in her dry skin provided a window to view glistening fragments of white bone, and the pink scraps of flesh adhered to them. Senna began to tremble once more. She could not take her eyes off of it. She could not forgive herself for feeling disgust at her own sister, let alone tossing her aside like Phil. Great. So Suwa's probably going to take her out, and because Kozoe is not going to be able to do anything, probably take Kozoe out, and everything's going to go to crap in this one. It was exactly like back then, when she had seen her mother's last moments. Her mother, who had died while ruled completely by madness. Still nestled within her mother's arms, her sister had been shredded to pieces and consumed, left only as a heap of pitiful remains. In response to the sight she'd been forced to witness, rather than sadness or horror, what she had felt was pure, utter revulsion. Remnants of guilt remained lodged deep within her chest. Despising her father was her way of averting her eyes from that emotion. Even though a part of her very much knew this was an attack brought on by a delusion, it reawakened feelings that had been sealed deep within her heart, leaving her entirely motionless. It was as if her wrists and ankles were bound. But Senna was not the only one suffering from such a state. Kozoe was as well. An enormous mirror had materialized in front of the collapsed girl, and within it, a reflection of her with her legs covered in blood asked her a single question. Kozoe froze in terror. Large tears began to flow from her eyes. The wound she wanted to forget, the past she never wanted to remember. Tears of a deep decay began leaking from her heart and mind. She wanted to run away as far as her legs could take her. Desiring nothing more than to look away from the mirror, she wished to turn away. Yet, forgoing her will entirely, her body refused to move. Herself on the other side of the mirror was not shedding even a single tear. She was collapsing into Gestalterfall? I don't know. I've never heard that term before. Loss of axiomatacity, deterioration of cognitive ability, a concept in psychology with a Gestalt being the German word for form. The human brain perceives without question what it visually sees as A, based on the environment, circumstances, and knowledge gained through experience. However, when A's identity is rejected for some reason or another, the obvious becomes no longer obvious, and one will fall victim to a state in which they can see A but are no longer able to perceive it as A. Just like when she had lost all words so long ago, just like when her heart and mind had been broken so long ago. This is creepy as hell. No longer able to see herself, she herself questioned herself in the mirror. She lacked any certainty that it was her own voice. She lacked any certainty that it was her own hairstyle. She lacked any certainty that it was her own nose. She lacked any certainty that it was her own pair of eyes. She lacked any certainty that it was the fullness of her own lips. She lacked any certainty that it was her own shape. She lacked any certainty that it was her own face.
君はコズピーだよ。
Her shape in the mirror had been on the cusp of dividing infinitely, but the voice that suddenly burst in her mind had put a stop to it. Oh yeah, because that's Takumi, right? Because he can see everything that's going on, so he's trying to, like, get them out of that, like, out of their delusions.
私はコズピー。私はコズピー。
She reconfirmed her identity. Kozoe had returned to herself. Cracks ripped through the enormous mirror before her, and then it shattered into pieces. Kozoe searched for the voice of her savior. When her gaze arrived at the ticket gate, she recognized exactly who it was. Her real voice, the one that would have been lost forever, called out to him. Kozupi called out, now with her inner voice, but with her, or not with her inner voice, but with her real voice. I realized it was the first time I'd ever heard her use it. It was thanks to Kozupi that I'd managed to get over here so quickly. I'd been next to a police box at the top of Dokenzaka when I'd heard her inner voice screaming for help. Running toward that voice had brought me here, and when I got here, I saw Senna and Kozupi, faces pale from being shown a delusion I couldn't see, and Hatano-san collapsed and covered in blood. I'd found them, but I was too late.
こいつはラッキーっすね.
A man with a gun in his hand was standing at the crossing. He twirled and whirled it around his fingers as if he were some sort of gunslinger. Contrasting heavily with the suit he was wearing, he had a rucksack on his back. A harsh mechanical noise was emanating from it. Suwa Mamoru, a detective from the Tokyo MPD's first investigation division. This wasn't the first time I'd run into him, and I knew exactly what he had done.
もともとは目障りな畑の親子を処分しに来たんすけどね。西条くん、君が自分から火に飛び込んできてくれて感謝感激っす。君を見かけたら捕まえろってことになってるんすよ。
誰に？
内緒っす。
He smiled a flippant smile, one that was somewhat reminiscent of Detective Bond's. But there was one key difference. Detective Bond's smile had always been just an act. An act meant to throw people off or rile them up. When it came to Suwa, however, the sly smile was who he truly was.
あんたはノロセの居場所を知ってる？
西条くんさ。
Suwa heaved a sigh, shaking his head in an extremely exaggerated motion.
口の利き方に気をつけてほしいっすね。自分の方が年上っすよ。
バンっていう人を殺したのはあんただ。
だから
刑事のくせに人を殺すなんて。
君には言われたくないっす。
I gripped my D-sword tightly.
あんたみたいなやつに敬語を使う義理なんてないよ。
そんな舐めた口聞いていいんすか？殺すぞ。
Oh.
童貞野郎。
Oh. Even from this distance, it was clear to see the smile on Sua's face had disappeared. Without moving from where he was, he gestured with his free hand like he was trying to shake something off. An impact, followed by pain. It was an all too abrupt sensation. When I looked at my shoulder in surprise, I saw a familiar-looking cross pierced into it. No, it was no cross. It was a stake. A cross-shaped stake from the crucifixion case. It had come at me too fast to see. The area was so dark I hadn't even realized it was flying toward me until it had already hit me. Suwa had thrown it, without moving from his spot. He'd thrown it from that distance with pinpoint accuracy. I cautiously touched the stake. It felt cold and smooth. Was it a delusion, or was it real? The pain was growing more and more intense. I couldn't put any strength into my hand. I wasn't able to hold on to my D-sword anymore. Oh no, everything's going to shit. Suwa raised his voice in an attempt to suppress his rage. Not even a moment later, Suwa was holding even more cross-shaped stakes in his hand, doing his best to restrain his furious rage that was on the verge of pouring out. He fired off the additional stakes towards Nishijo Takumi. I feel like a ninja now all of a sudden. They disregarded all form of drag and the law of physics altogether. Don't tell me this dude... Is he a gigalomaniac too? Or is he just like really good at throwing stuff? As if they possessed wills of their own, they sped intently towards Takumi's arms. 15 had found their mark thus far. Not a single one had missed. I feel like this guy's got secret powers. I feel like this guy's also a gigalomaniac because the fact he'd show up here and knowing that he's going up to multiple gigalomaniacs, and yet he doesn't seem afraid at all. They'd assaulted Takumi's shoulders, upper arms, wrists, palms, hips, thighs, knees, and shins. Blood spilled from every one of his deeply carved wounds. So yeah, he can create delusions as well, like, I'm going to throw these and they are going to hit. Suwa already had another stake in his hand, and once again he fired it off just like the others. Okay. I felt an incredibly strange sensation. He's probably not listening to me anyway, Suwa thought to himself. This is interesting. Each and every wound carved into my body only made me feel more alive. Suwa hurled yet another stake toward Takumi, who hung his head at the mercy of his attacker. Okay, even a normal guy like me can mess around with the same power you freaks have got. So, could Takumi somehow create a delusion to be like, I'm gonna be able to beat this guy? Can he do something like that if he's, like, the strongest one? All of it could be attributed to the rucksack the man was wearing on his back, about a bag housing a Noah 2 terminal within it. With that, he could enjoy Noah 2's power even at a distance. He'd become an artificial gigalomaniac. Okay, so that does it with all the rucksacks they're able to do? I guess so, right? Because that guy in the hospital, he created the image of Yua's sister. Suwa found himself wholly bewitched by his power. He was among the fanatics who would commit the dirtiest of deeds in the name of the founder and his teachings. He was among the vanguards who'd commit the dirt. Okay, so one of them is like how, I guess, like from Suwa's point of view, and the other one is like Takumi can read his mind and know what he's thinking. Because the things he's saying are the same, but some of the sentences are slightly different. Suwa hurled yet another stake. It penetrated the nape of my neck. Yeah, it penetrated the nape of Takumi's neck. I was racked with extreme pain, pain that felt as if my entire body was being torn in two. Pain so horrible I felt as if I might go insane. The boiling, ruthless bloodlust simmering in Suwa's heart demanded to know just how much pain the boy could endure. Springing forth from the torture taking place, death began to rear its head. Springing forth from the torture taking place, he would make death rear its head in him. I was unable to resist, and while I still managed to put enough force into my legs to stop myself from falling over, Takumi was unable to resist, and while he still managed to avoid falling over, none of that could prevent the hail of stakes coming at me. None of that could prevent the hail of stakes coming at him. My chest, my stomach, my toes, my entire body, with no mercy in sight, stakes both thick and sharp were continuously pounded into me.
虫ピンで標本にされた昆虫みたいだな。しかもカブトムシとか蝶とかじゃない。お前みたいなガキにはコガネムシあたりがお似合いだ。
Oh, language, sir. Wow. I couldn't stand for another second. Willpower alone was all that kept me from collapsing. Suwa was baffled at what could possibly be keeping him from collapsing. But I was almost at my limit. My field of vision was becoming pixelated. It was hard to see anymore. With eyes as empty as those, he likely could not see anymore.
遺言があるならいいな。ただし20時以内だ。
Tightly clutching the next stake, Suwa was talking to me as if he had already won. The next would kill me.
さっき童貞やろうって言った。
傷ついたのか?
Using his voice in the distance as a guide, I glared in Suwa's direction. The light in Takumi's eyes were soon to die. He glared in Suwa's direction all the same.
これが最後の一本。信仰の救いはお前にはやらねえよ!
I could sense the air tearing around the stake that Suwa had hurled.
知ってる?
Oh. The stake would serve as the cross, the messenger bringing both certain death and the promised gospel. Death would come to whoever it struck.
童貞の妄想力は
Is he just gonna blow all of the stakes away? Go Super Saiyan? Let's go. A dull thud resounded. Wait, what? The stakes had deeply penetrated his forehead. An incredible burst of pain exploded within Suwa. Oh shit, so he switched the bodies. That's fucking amazing, dude. An incredible burst of pain exploded within Suwa, gushing forth from every part of his body. As if it had been entirely an illusion, the intense pain that had consumed every part of my entire body immediately disappeared. And they just switched. That's really cool. That they took the top from Takumi's point of view, bottom was from Suwa's point of view, and flipped it. That's so cool. Suwa let out a mute scream, writhing in agony. I let out a deep breath and slowly licked my dry lips. An array of cross-shaped stakes penetrated Suwa's entire body. There was a single cross-shaped stake in my hand. I knew they were going somewhere with that double thing there. Like, there was a reason for that, because that had never really happened in the game yet. When he looked upward, he saw the cross-shaped stake embedded in his forehead. When I looked upward, I saw the overcast, gloomy sky above.
復活の奇跡は物語で妄想なんだ。何をした妄想シンクロ
Assimilation unto a delusion, erosion unto the mind. Like two ripples negating one another, like two wavelengths resonating with one another. Entangling together, melting together. A fate which distorts created by one. A fate which is distorted created by another. Switching them out, switching them in. There's no way that's possible, Suwa thought to himself. There's no way that's possible. Suwa's expression laid his thoughts bare.
神の先兵ならメシアと同じように朽ち果てろ。
Messiah, from the Hebrew word Messiah, meaning the one anointed with oil. In Judaism and Christianity, the Messiah is the one who shall bring peace to the world. In Christianity, Jesus Christ is considered to have been the Messiah. Takumi tossed the stake away. I tossed the stake away. Color was quickly fading from Suwa's field of vision. Light was quickly fading from Suwa's eyes.
それと僕は救いなんかいらないよ。
Suwa could no longer reply. Without falling to the ground, he breathed his final breath. I made my way back into the station. Kozupi's eyes were wide and her mouth hung open. She was completely stunned. Seeing all of this must have really surprised her. Her leg was covered in so much blood it was hard to look at.
小ズピ、大丈夫?
She's like, that was so cool. Without getting up from the ground, she nodded. It didn't look like she was able to stand on her own. Her shimmering eyes looked up at me. You know, like as soon as he got that D sword, all of a sudden he understands everything. He seems to be able to just have complete control over what he's doing. It's like he's learned how to control his powers in such a way in the span of like a day. Kozupi, you're talking out loud. Putting a finger to her lips, she tilted her head in surprise, but she seemed to forget about it pretty quickly after that.
童貞さんの妄想力はすごいの？
すごいよ。
Senna once told me ignorance was a sin, but I don't quite agree with that. Not knowing things go hand in hand with delusions. The less you know, the more your delusions can grow and surge to the point of infinity, really. Therefore, if you already know and have experienced everything, there'd be nothing left to fantasize about. And if there's one thing virgins definitely lack, it's experience. So it only makes sense their delusions are the best around. Speaking of Senna, where was she? I searched the dimly lit platform for her. She was standing at the edge of the platform, hanging her head, and at her feet was Hatano Issei, lying in a pool of his own blood. He showed no signs of moving, leading me to realize he was already dead. I was too late. If anyone was going to know where to find Noah 2, it would have been him.
Noah 2は渋谷駅のすぐ横にある。
As if she'd read my mind, with her eyes still aiming down at Hatano-san, at the corpse of her dead father, Senna began to murmur something.
この男が死ぬ間際に私の心に伝えてきた。渋谷駅の東口、ビルの屋上にある。今は閉鎖されたプラネタリウム。そこにノア2がある。
どうも。
I wasn't sure if I should have said something to her or just stay silent. She hated her father enough to want him dead. And even though her wish had come true, from where I stood, she looked miserable as could be.
くそ。私をかばって。それで罪を償ったつもりか。
Her words were targeted at her father's lifeless corpse, but he said nothing in return, and he never would again.
お前は自分の罪を認めた。その上で私に見せつけるように。自殺したようなものだ。許せない。私はお前を許さない。
セナさん、心が泣いてるの。本当はお父さん殺したくなかったのら。
It was just as Kozupi said, and with those words, Senna's usual resolute demeanor disappeared. Her shoulders trembled. Heartbroken, she fell to her knees.
どうして生きて罪を償おうとしないんだ。どうして私を一人にするんだ。どうして。
セナ。
西条。お願い。
Senna raised her head. The teary expression on her face now was nothing like the stern one she always wore.
ノア2を壊して。
Suffering from a terrible grief, she spoke with the fragility of a girl who had just lost the only family she had left.
僕を殺そうとしたくせに。君のお願いなんて聞く義理はないよ。
But I'm gonna be like, it's a good thing that I was gonna do that anyway, but I'm not doing that for you.
匠さん。
Turning my back towards Senna and Kozupi, I began to march down the tunnel to Shibuya Station. Before me were two giant gaping holes. A deep darkness stretched deep inside both of them. Passing through them would be the quickest way to get to Shibuya Station.
僕は僕の目的のためだけにノア2を壊す。絶対に。
I had a feeling Senna said something after that, but I wasn't listening anymore. Holy heck, guys. Alright, things are amping up even further, and it seems with the end of this episode, we are hurtling towards the end of the first playthrough, the first ending, as Takumi heads to the site of Noah 2 to confront Narose and try and save Rimi. Given that this is the initial playthrough, I don't see it going well, especially because, like, given the beginning of the game where I was like lying in rubble, I'm feeling like things are not going to go well. At least it seems like Rimi's going to survive if it's any indication that she comes to help me out. But this kind of seems like maybe the bad end, or at least like tens of thousands of people are dead. You know, we didn't manage to stop the big earthquake. Maybe we can stop Norase and the Nozomi group, but there's still a lot of casualties. So maybe like the true end is going and stopping all of that from happening in the first place. But that was a pretty badass episode, especially that part at the end with switching places with Suwa so that he gets killed by his own stakes. That was really cool. It's nice to see that Takumi has finally become the shonen hero that he was meant to be, and I'm excited to see what I assume will be the conclusion to this playthrough at least, and then we have all of the other endings to get after that. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll let you know as well, I did mention at the beginning, I will be away next week on vacation, so unfortunately there will be no episode of Chaos Head or any of my other series next week, so unfortunately you will have to wait a little bit for the finale to this playthrough, but hopefully it'll be worth the wait, guys. I'm super excited to see how it ends. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you for the next episode. Until then, bye. Special shoutouts to my top tier patrons: Revealing Storm, Lynn's VA, Kenju Storm, and Icognito.